Hello and welcome to this week's musical devotion. Some 22 years ago and change, for the Christmas of 1998, my present to myself was having had made the decision to give 6 months' notice to the church where I had been working for the last 2.5 years. I wanted them to have plenty of time to secure the services of an interim organist and to start the search process, and wanted to see the program year through to the end. I am afraid to say it had been a bad match from the start. They were in need of someone far more experienced and savvy than I at managing some dysfunctional church politics and some very sensitive interpersonal issues. And when they hired me, I was a whopping 22 years old. I had no business being there. In that atmosphere, I definitely did not thrive, and they didn't thrive under my musical leadership. I should have left after the first year and, honestly, maybe after the first week. But my inexperience had me concerned about the potential stigma of leaving a church after 1 year. I wouldn't hesitate now. Working there, it felt as though my talents and my skills were disappearing before my very eyes. I felt anxiety and dread pulling into the parking lot. I wondered what was wrong with me. I wondered why I felt like a bull in a china shop, and why I felt so grievously under-equipped to surmount the challenges of the position. When I drove out of the parking lot after my last Sunday the following June, I felt a sense of relief and happiness that had evaded me, sadly, for most of the 3 years that I had worked there. Even though I was relieved, I still had a personal reckoning. My faith and my spiritual life were in tatters. It would probably be a stretch to say that I was agnostic at the time. My sense of my vocation was non-existent. I felt very far away from a God in whom I wasn't sure I even believed. My soul longed for that connection, but my heart could not discern it. God yearns for that connection as well. But in our fallen humanity, sometimes we just go through seasons of separation. After I left, I decided to work full-time at a bookstore that I had been working at part-time to earn a living. And things improved for me. It felt like I just wasn't going to pursue working for the church anymore. I gave serious consideration to going to culinary school, but decided against that. In this perilous moment, into our lives stepped a very distinguished priest and gentleman called Charles Carter III. To do him any kind of justice would take much longer than I could ask you to watch, so I've included a link to a Facebook post that I wrote about him when he passed away a little over 4 years ago, which describes in a few vignettes the experience of knowing and loving him. He and I served as interim rector and interim organist, respectively, in a tiny Episcopal church near the Philadelphia airport. We connected at the urging of a mutual friend, the priest from the church where I had served during college, who was very concerned about me at this time in my life. And she called me to tell me that she thought that he and I would get along very, very well, and that was very prescient. And I am forever grateful to Sherry for having made the connection. My sense of self and my sense of my own abilities at this time were very shaky. And one of the few things at which I felt I was adept was cooking. He and his marvelously lovely wife, Sarah, had had us over for dinner in their grand home in Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia. It was like an English country manor transported onto an impossibly elegant back street in their neighborhood. While we were there, he prepared a sumptuous feast, many courses. And after that magnificent night of hospitality, perhaps the most grand dinner that had ever been prepared for Amy and myself in someone's home, I really wanted to return the favor. The problem was, we lived in a slightly dumpy apartment complex, and our living room didn't overlook the grand mansions of Chestnut Hill, but the loading docks of a Walmart. We felt a little guilty bringing them into our slightly dodgy neighborhood, but they arrived on time, all smiles, enthusiastic, grace personified. We had another fantastic evening. I pulled out all the stops in the kitchen and things went very well. I allowed myself a little pride in what I had accomplished in making that meal, and that was a feeling that was not very frequent in those days. Later in the week, a thank you note arrived. It was on one of those calling cards with the author's name embossed at the top. In very careful script covering both sides of the cards, Charles had enumerated all of the tiny details, all of the subtle things in which I had taken special care in the preparation of that meal. I felt seen and understood for the first time by someone other than Amy in a very, very long time. I read that card many times in the ensuing months when I needed a little boost. Over that year of knowing and working with him, I absolutely believe that he lit the way back to my vocation, to my sense of calling, and to my belief in God. I continue to feel indebted to him, and I am glad that I was able to express to him all of this before he passed away. I don't know if I would have been able to find my way back to the church without his gentle and gracious nature. From this time of my life, I would like to share a few points. The first is that we must be exquisitely careful with one another in the church. And by that, I do not mean cautious, but rather full of care for one another. It is not enough to be friendly or kind, even though from time to time that can seem a challenge in and of itself. We should look out for one another. We should extend God's grace to one another voraciously. We should consider ourselves advocates for and guardians of one another's spiritual lives. I didn't have anyone like that at that church so many years ago, and the consequences were dire. We must examine our actions towards one another. Are they grace-filled? Are they life-affirming? Do they lift up or do they tear down? Beyond being full of care for one another in the church, we might take a page from my friends Charles and Sarah. Their generosity towards others was epic. There will come in each of our lives many times when we will have the opportunity to help those whose souls are in need. Even if it seems an inconvenience, we should leap at those opportunities and we should be grateful for them. I think of the sometime motto of our denomination, God's work, our hands. We need, in a world desperately in need of it, to be God's hands. Now, this is a very circuitous route to this week's piece, motet by Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina, perhaps the greatest composer of the Italian Renaissance. This brief motet takes its Latin text from the first verse of the 42nd Psalm. Because we are observing the baptism of our Lord this Sunday, I wanted to share with you a baptismal piece, but then I struggled with any sort of obvious choices. We're going to be singing baptismal hymns on Sunday, and I will be playing a slightly thorny Bach chorale prelude that sets in music a sense of the flow of the Jordan River. So then I remembered the Easter Vigil, the service at which in liturgical denominations, converts to the faith are frequently baptized. It is a long night at church, and though a vigil is a lot of work for clergy and musicians, usually the night before Easter when we have even more work the next morning, I miss them from my years of working in the Roman Catholic and Episcopal churches. The 42nd Psalm is one of the psalms of the long introductory part of the liturgy that precedes the baptisms, during which the story of our salvation is recounted through a series of readings and psalms from the Old Testament. After the baptism, the service then pivots to a rapturous Easter celebration. A translation of that first verse of the 42nd Psalm, the text of the piece I'm sharing with you, reads thusly: "As a deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul longs for you, O God." In Lent, I'll share a kind of lament setting of that text by the great 20th century English composer Herbert Howells. But for today, in honor of Charles, who interceded when my soul was longing for a reconnection with God, Here's perhaps the most gracious setting of that first verse of the 42nd Psalm in existence. It expresses the longing, but it seems illumined from within, full of confidence in God's providence and grace. Palestrina wrote in a style of composition known as Renaissance polyphony. Each voice part is independent, and there are these marvelously long lines, but then they become part of the musical tapestry of the whole. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, as with Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on Christmas carols, the mere mention of this Palestrina motet, Sicut Cervus, will set the hearts of music lovers aglow. It is profoundly, deeply grace-filled and beautiful. To sing this music well requires the entire being of the singer, heart, mind, your physical self, your spirit, everything. Because of the length of these intricately composed lines, one's breathing needs to be masterfully executed. And you will see the conductor of this wonderful group of singers preparing for and breathing with all of the singers as they enter this arresting stream of polyphony. The piece was recorded in the Lady Chapel at Ely Cathedral in the United Kingdom, one of the most acoustically perfect spaces in the world. For years I had heard and admired recordings made there without having seen the space, and I will confess, having seen it, it doesn't look at all like what I had imagined, and in particular the strange blue statue of Mary in the center. Nevertheless, hearing Palestrina from that august space will surely do your soul some good. Please give it a listen. It's very much like a musical massage, a moment of grace and peace envisioned by one of the greatest composers ever and sung by a really fabulous ensemble, the Gesualdo Six. Please be safe and well this week, and I hope to see you online for worship on Sunday morning. God bless.